So with that done, we can proceed. Still recording, so watch out what you say. I would start with, it seems pretty challenging, why, third to fifth grade and sixth to eighth grade. Well, first of all, I thought the greatest comment there was how the teacher who said this was by far the best that addressed their curriculum.
Oh, yeah.
All the years that she's been coming. That was a great comment.
Mm-hmm.
But it certainly is a challenge to do one show that will deal with standards of third grade and fifth grade, and then again a show that spans sixth to eighth grade.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find that challenging?
I personally haven't found it to be super challenging. It does seem like even when we have multiple schools that are there at once, it does seem like overall they seem to be catching on to the concepts and keeping up with what we're talking about. I know that I fall short on this sometimes, but I know that some presenters make a point to anytime that they're giving a school show beforehand, as they're doing like going over how we answer questions, they specifically ask a question that addresses what grade the audience is. So it's like, oh, if you're a third grader, say apple. If you're a fourth grader, say pineapple. I don't know. So that the presenter can get an idea for what their audience is and can maybe adjust a little bit based on what the actual makeup of that particular crowd is. Because we do have as much as 270 kids sometimes, as many as like 3 or 4 different schools that could be there at once. So it is a little hard to gauge, which is part of why we're doing the surveys, is it's a little hard to gauge from the presenter perspective of whether or not you are reaching everyone, because you have such a crowd. You have probably certain schools that are going to be yelling their answers louder than others. So getting that feedback from the teachers is really helpful.
Anybody has a question, make sure you unmute.
I have a question. You said that you have up to 270 at a time sometimes. What's your average? What's normal for a show for the school groups?
I would say the average is probably around 100 or so, and it does vary depending on what time of year it is. Like right now, since we're getting to the end of the school year, it seems usually it tends to happen that schools are kind of trying to cram in their field trips at the last minute. So right now we're getting pretty frequently over 200 kids in the shows, and the fewest I've had in a school show is maybe like 50 or so, something like that. They don't tend to be super small, but yeah, it's a wide range.
Kind of nice when you can have the small ones, so it's a little more intimate.
Yeah, that can be nice. Yeah, and then you can really tell who's answering and stuff. Yeah. Oh, and I see Toshi was wondering how long the shows are. So we try to aim, they usually end up being around 40 minutes or so. We try not to go longer than 40 or 45 minutes, because then we're starting to run into when it's time to start our next show. So anywhere between 30 to 45 minutes is kind of the range we try to aim for. Is there a noticeable difference in think pair share between 3rd to 8th grade? Actually, Josh, are you out there? Josh has given the.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, you've given the 6th to 8th grade show the most. Would you say that it's harder to do think pair share with them, or?
It's definitely different when you've got the 6th to 8th graders. You can ask more challenging questions. I give them a little bit more time to discuss, and then I ask them to pair share what they and their partner discussed. With the older kids, I feel like there's a degree of embarrassment where if you get the answer wrong. So we also try and normalize more that we're making predictions. We're not right or wrong. We're stating what we assume before we see the information. Then we discuss, and then we share again after we've seen new information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and K-2 is definitely often shorter. The kindergarten through 2nd grade show is at most like 20 minutes long.
I think the think share pair is a great technique actually for planetarium use. And I'm always on the hunting and on the lookout for other techniques that would not work so well in a planetarium. I mean, let me rephrase that. A lot of things that work well in a classroom don't work in a planetarium just because of the darkness and the size of the group.
Mm-hmm.
But there are really good techniques. Think, pair, share is one of them.
Yeah.
Sometimes if you have sort of like a multiple choice answer and you present kids with, 3 or 4 or 5 different choices and have them kind of do a applause or some kind of response to which one they think is the right answer. Have you ever done anything like that, or are there other techniques that you've used?
Yeah, I have at certain points during the show, it's usually between one answer and another generally when I've been giving the shows. Like, for example, after we look at the first couple seasons of days for the summer, I'm like, okay, so based on what we've been looking at, do you think the sun's going to be more towards the north when it rises or more towards the south? And then the answer is like, what, do you think the sun's going to get higher in the sky or lower in the sky? And then we see the result of that. So it's usually an option between 2 different things.
And how do they respond? Is it vocally or by
Yeah,
applause?
they yell out their answers. And one thing about the think, pair, share too, one of the things I always try to make sure to go over when I'm talking about that they're going to be discussing with each other is that I'll be like, okay, discuss with your neighbor such and such. And then once they hear my voice come back on, then that's their cue to wrap up the conversation. And then I may say, okay, what did you talk about? What are some things you came up with? So yeah, so it mostly is them yelling out their answers. That's why I try to really hammer home at the beginning, like you answer one time, and then because otherwise it's just bedlam. But yeah. And Geoff was asking if we have names for the shows. Yeah, the 3rd to 5th grade show is called Motions of the Solar System, and then the 6th to 8th grade show is Our Solar System and Beyond. That one. Oh, that is a good point. Geoff was asking if we have techniques for making sure everyone has a partner for Think, Pair, Share. I have not had a particular way to ensure that. Usually they always have at least someone they're sitting next to, so I just say like talk with your neighbor, whoever's next to you. So I don't know. That gets a little complicated if you have someone that's comfortable talking next to them. That one.
Do you have any sort of pre-visit activities that you send out in the hopes that the teachers will review some concepts with the students before they come in, or do you just assume everybody's coming in at a very low knowledge level?
That there is some stuff available to them that they can get from our website, I think from our educator website of different activities that they can do. That is one of the questions that we asked in our surveys was whether or not they did what sort of preparation that they did before the show.
Yeah.
And we did get a mixture of answers with that. Some people used this as the first part of their section on astronomy, and some of them did some sort of activity beforehand. So that could be something that the presenter could do beforehand also is kind of ask like if people have covered anything in the show before. And we do always, I always ask whether or not they've been to a planetarium before. And most of the time, most of the people before, so it gives at least what they're. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Okay, Chris Miller. So Chris Miller was saying in Texas they have 3rd grade students learn facts about the planets, and they have a capacity of 60 and divide the students into planet groups. Each group uses a voice recording app on the iPad to discuss whether what they remember about their planet. And students are encouraged to prepare a poster of some other information to share with other groups. That's really cool. study similarities and differences between the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun. Cement understanding with Europe exchange facts.
You know, Mary, I have one. I apologize for this question, but the sound actually cut out when you said something about the kindergarten shows didn't change. And I think you said why, but I didn't hear why.
Yeah, so we didn't really change the kindergarten through second grade show because with the, excuse me, when the NGSS standards came out, the standards for kindergarten through second grade didn't really change that much. So we didn't really feel the need to change up that. So that show is just what do we call it? But it's we look at the sun rising and setting, look at constellations, and it's just a simple moon phases, constellations, rising and setting kind of show.
I think it was very wise to limit the standards that you try to deal with. That was a good decision. And I'm a little curious about what the process was for deciding which standard to focus on.
Yeah, if dtell or Josh want to jump in on that, they were more involved in the very beginning of this process, so they might be able to glean a bit more.
Yeah. As long as my internet doesn't drop out because I have really bad Wi-Fi at home. Part of the idea of which standards we chose is we sort of sat down with our education coordinators and they sort of presented every standard they could find that had some connection to astronomy, physics, or geology, and a few other things as well as the cross-cutting concepts. And this is where that iterative design of these shows came in, is in these meetings we sort of looked at, in our Vegas brainstorming, which of these standards formed sort of a continuous plot line that we could follow. So that way students would feel like there was a common thread of what they were learning in the planetarium, rather than trying to throw what seemed to us to be disjointed standards at them. And of course, there's, I think, some bridges and tangents that we get out of that too. But having related standards, and again, ones that we thought basically it made sense to teach with the dome. So we tried to avoid things that we've thought could be got across very well in a classroom setting, and focus on standards that we thought the planetarium created a unique immersive experience with. And so hence the sky observations and a lot of the planet and spacecraft simulations that are in the show that aren't something students necessarily get to experience in the classroom.
Dan, do you remember any specific standards that you looked at and said, no, that doesn't fit very well for the planetarium?
There definitely were, but I can't recall them off the top of my head for sure.
There were a lot of ones that tied into principles of geology, principles of superposition and stuff that we felt could be easily addressed in a classroom, that we sat there and said, this is definitely something relevant to the show, but this is something a teacher could go over. It doesn't necessarily need the planetarium.
Yeah, I think there might have been a standard related to stellar temperature and color that sort of didn't seem as useful to be done in the planetarium. And also sort of the bulk identification of the planets. We figured students don't have that hard of a time learning all the different planets, which is part of why we shifted from visiting every planet, as we did in our previous school shows, to using the planets as a modeling mechanism to talk about effectively astrophysics at a very reduced level.
And one last thing we tried to hit there was with touching on the basics on Earth, using Earth as our primer, allowing students to look at these planets thereafter. Like Mary said, the last planet, I tried to say nothing at all in the 6 to 8 show and just let them use what they've learned before to kind of examine, cut into the planet, see what features they can see, and make predictions about what the nature of this planet will be. And that's usually 55 Cancri, just to give them something awful and hot lava-y to look at.
Awful or cool?
I think this is kind of neat that we actually have a panel from Cal Academy. We've got Dan and Josh. It's like this is our first panel seminar. That really nice.
One thing that struck me, this is John Erickson at Lawrence Hall, was how well your third, fifth grade addresses the first grade standard about patterns of Earth, Moon, and Sun. And it reminds me a lot of the program we're doing now, at least the first half of your program. Imagine the first half of your program stretched over about an hour. And instead of doing the patterns of Earth, Moon, and then the full year, and then going to space, we kind of jump back and forth from a pattern on Earth, let's see it from space, a new pattern on Earth, let's see it from space. What I think what makes it work for the young kids is that we try to tie it to human activity patterns too, waking, sleeping, meals, going to school, vacation kind of patterns. One of my favorite think, pair, share questions is, what patterns do you talk about in school? And we get lots of shapes and color kinds of patterns too.
That's a really cool aspect too of bringing it to a more personal level, seeing how the patterns relate to everyday life. I like that.
One of the dangers, especially at the younger grades, is when you start projecting visualizations from space. I wonder whether what they're actually getting out of it, and whether they can really imagine themselves or what is actually going on. Can they really comprehend it? But there's no way of proving that without actually doing some kind of actual research and assessment on it.
Yeah, and I have a variety of first and second. Some I can tell they're with me, and some I can tell they're looking at the pretty pattern in the sky. It's sort of a laboratory to see what's successful and how often with different grades. But that idea of marking that spot on Earth and watching it go into the daytime, we don't say apple, we say nighttime and daytime. Is there a rationale for apple or some?
I don't know why I chose apple. I think that's just one of the words that's just been simple to use I've heard other presenters use that as like a call and response sort of thing. Like if you're a third grader, say apple kind of thing. And
It's your
there's
general
just something really
sponsors,
entertaining about having 200 kids just screaming apple when they get in and then hearing it slowly like fade down as the San Francisco point goes away. So I've become fond of doing that. And then as I go through and I'm going to the different times a year and then showing the days at those different times a year, they'll continue to say, when I'll be talking and they'll be like, apple. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. We don't need to keep saying apple when you see sunset and sunrise, but it does seem to get them engaged and paying attention to that part of the show.
I also have fun with different times of day, just seeing, would you be able to tell me about when it's lunchtime? And, why did you say that? And having conversations about that when we're looking from space and we see the part that's marked at our location, leave the dark side and go about halfway through the bright side. Whether they get it or not, they do a lot of good talking about it.
And that seems like a good, I've found that it seems like some of the teachers in their responses to our surveys, especially a few of the teachers talk about how they use the planetarium as their starting point and then they go back to the classroom and expand on what they learned. So even if maybe they're not getting it completely when they're in the planetarium, hopefully they can revisit it when they get back to the classroom and kind of nailing the concept over.
That image you had of when you were going through the spheres, the issue of layers and what makes an Earth like, or what is the Earth, and the different spheres of the Earth, and ending up with the magnetosphere. That's a pretty abstract thing, and I was wondering if there's any. I hope that you go to the fact that it is invisible, that what you're seeing there in the picture is not really what it looks like, because you can't see it at all.
Yeah, we
That's a
definitely
tricky
point out
thing.
that it's invisible. Yeah.
Because
Like, why am I not seeing this blue glowing thing up in the sky?
exactly, some kids take it literally. But
Mhm.
it occurs to me that whether or not kids understand something is not of primary importance in the planetarium in a lot of ways. On the PBS NewsHour last night, they had Neil deGrasse Tyson doing the segment. What was their segment that they do at the end of the show? Uh, Something but amazing, or it's a segment that they do where somebody says an amazing thing. That's my amazing take on things. And what Neil deGrasse Tyson said, and he's somebody who I remember meeting. So some of us old timers met him at early planetarium conferences. When people could actually meet him in person at a planetarium conference.
When he actually came to planetarium
Yeah,
things.
exactly. Yeah. So he's beyond that now. But what he said was that what got him started in everything was going to the planetarium in New York and just getting so excited about it. And then from then on, when anybody asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, it was astrophysicist.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I mean, it's part of why we sort of limited the number um, of standards we wanted to hit, is because we wanted the show to be about inspiring kids to want to learn more on their own and not trying to give them so much information they felt overwhelmed. So whet their appetite for more astronomy learning, rather than feeling like they've learned as much astronomy as possible.
There's no more to know.
Okay, we're not restricted to just questions. We can actually anybody can give whatever thoughts they have too.
Now, that was Neil's most spectacular take.
That's it. Brief, but brief and spectacular. Yeah.
There was a study published recently that said that curiosity was the most important predictor in a child's success, and that a child that was curious, it didn't matter what their socioeconomic background was, they would succeed in school and in life. And when I read that story, I immediately thought of the planetarium, because that's one of the things that we can do so well, is encourage kids to ask questions and be curious and show them what it means to ask questions and find the answers.
Yeah, I want to say, I think a great thing about what we do with these shows, based on my experience in many school groups and many teachers over the years, is we really get the kids amped up at the start of the show and excited to like shout and respond, but get that into a structured way. But I think a really good thing is, like, they're not told to just come into the planetarium and be quiet. They're told to come into the planetarium and be excited. And I think that's a big part of like helping to foster that curiosity, as well as feel like even if we can't directly respond to every student, that they're asking questions and those questions are being heard and becoming part of this process of discovery.
And it's also really exciting to point out that we don't have the answers to everything, and that the students in the audience may answer questions that we can't even imagine right now. That's fascinating to talk about too.
Which is a big part of the 6 to 8 show, and focusing on the spacecraft that have been used to explore these planets, but that each of these planets has more mysteries that we don't yet know.
Yeah.
And especially with both shows ending on exoplanets too, and talking about this new area of science we're just starting to explore. It's a little bit older than the kids' lifetimes now, but was within the person in the booth's lifetime, and that this is where they can make contributions to science in the future, is learning more about other planets.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts about these shows, is going to visit the exoplanets, showing that, like, our scientific methods that we use, like, can be applied to places that are totally in different locations, totally outside of our own planet.
Well, we have no more minutes left, but if anybody has anything else they want to add. Actually, there's no time limit on these things, but we have gone for about an hour, and some people like to have strict 1 hour meetings, except for those people who like to have strict 2 hour meetings. But again, this has been great, Mary. Thanks so much for taking this on and giving
Here,
us
here.
your, yeah.
Mhm.
This is everybody. This is your last chance to give her your applause. Okay, appreciation.
All right.
Thank you. We have a small one interjecting in there. Yeah, thank you all for taking the time to listen and to have a discussion about it. It's been fun.
Okay, and it's been recorded, so people can hear it later if they missed it. There will be no seminar in June because we're having the WAC meeting in Memphis, and there will be a PPA business meeting there that we're going to open up through a Zoom meeting just like this, except it's going to be a business meeting. So it may not be quite as fascinating as what we have here, but I encourage everybody to attend nonetheless. It should be interesting. Okay, well, and I noticed that we did have, at our maximum, we had about 15 people here. And by gum, there's still 13 on the line. So that means that means that people stuck around. It was interesting.
Glad to hear it.
Mhm.
Okay, and thanks everybody for joining us. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
for putting this together, Alan.
Mhm.
Yeah, thanks, Alan.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, bye everybody. Closing the meeting now, stopping the recording.